All right. Well, hi, welcome everyone, and just welcome to the One Place Excellence in Childcare podcast. We've got a special guest today. For most of you, you're very familiar with Lynn Wenger. Lynn used to um, work with One Place, but now she is involved in her own venture, and I'll get Lynn to sort of share a bit more about that. But today we're talking about the changing compliance landscape with Lynn Wenger. So, Lynn, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Martin. It's so great to see you again.
And so, what we're firstly want to ask you is we're asking, I guess, firstly, what was your journey into early education and childcare? Can you share that with us?
Sure. Well, like many of us, we have experienced being a consumer of childcare. So that was probably my first entree to it. And I think back to those days of what was important to me as a parent. And there's a lot behind that. But I think back to those days, the school's still around some 20 plus years later. So that's pointing to longevity. But my most recent, of course, is around compliance, and I am a systems and a process gal. So when you look at early education, there's been a lot of automation looking at repeatable processes. How do we streamline? How do we condense? And that's my love language. I love that type of work. And then when we look at early education, of course, it's a natural place for streamlining, but also the automation. And that's where I first met you, which was really when I delved into the whole topic of compliance in early education. And since then, let's see, I think that was about 2019, Martin, if I'm right, 18, 19.
Yeah, just before the pandemic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And living and breathing the compliance landscape is what prompted me to found the Compliance Alliance. And you guessed it, we're all things compliance. So that's what I'm focused in on and eager to jump into this conversation with you.
Great, thanks for that. So our topic today is the changing compliance landscape for childcare and early learning. So Lynn, how would you describe the current state of compliance and compliance issues for childcare owners, how you see it anyway?
Okay. One of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is first, let's get our definitions straight. Because when I say compliance, it might mean something different to the audience and the people that I'm talking with. So let's just kind of broad brush that. At the most simplest level, it's abiding by a set of rules to impact the outcome, right? And so when
Yeah.
you look at compliance, I see it across a broad spectrum. So it's licensing and regulation, it's accreditation and quality, it's around brand, it's around school safety, and then financial compliance. Those are just kind of 5 areas that we see. So we have kind of a broad perspective of compliance within that. But to answer the question about, like where are we seeing this? I think you were asking, as a priority, compliance as a priority. I would say that it continues to be top of mind, and almost since the pandemic, it really brought it to top of mind as well as a priority. So the recent benchmarks that were done in 2004, and then your most recent benchmark, I think it was Line Leaders benchmark study, said that it was 59% consider compliance top of the heap, and that was above billing, enrollment, and staffing. So it is a very high priority. And as you saw in the benchmark report, which by the time this airs, that'll be out, I had a sneak peek at it. But it was considered a very high and a high priority by your respondents. So it is top of mind.
Yeah, and I think the sense I get is, even when, we first entered into the US, it is certainly becoming more and more, as you said, top of mind, because I think people are starting to realize the importance of it. And whereas I think in the past, I think people have been a bit lackadaisical about it,
Mhm.
And it's interesting, just return from Australia, is that in Australia and New Zealand, because funding, a lot of it is tied to compliance, it is a bit more top of mind, but
Yeah.
we are seeing that in the US market anyway.
Right, right.
So if we step outside the industry at the moment, how do others handle risk and compliance?
So this is near and dear to my heart. Part of the role that I have at the Compliance Alliance is being a public relations voice for compliance. So really, it's looking at the best practices outside of our industry. So if you think about manufacturing or you think about healthcare, OSHA standards and ISO 9000 and other regulations are the default norm. It just is. Those are things that they know they need to do. And they put
Yeah.
great effort in funding, both in terms of people, training. So I think that's a model that we can borrow from, that we can look at it as a badge of honor. The reason why I say that is when we step back into early education, when we talk about compliance, it sometimes is perceived, not always, but a lot of times it's perceived as we're going to get dinged if we're not compliant. It's kind of like a stick versus the carrot, where a carrot
Yeah.
is leading us to want to be compliant, to be able to brag on those standards that we're meeting, to be able to give that sense to the staff and to the families that safety and quality are top of mind. And that's why we put that spotlight on it. So other industries consider it a badge of honor. And I think early education has the opportunity to step up and really showcase that themselves.
Yeah, and I think you're right there because, like you said, in healthcare especially, um, there's also third-party organizations which are monitoring, the safety of the patient. And, especially in our sector, in the early childhood, there's not so much. I mean, there's obviously licensing organizations, but the senses we get is that there is a higher scrutiny that they are um, demonstrating now to the sector. But also, as you said, I think it's something that we should be actively looking at proactively rather than it's kind of like, oh, it's something we have to do. I mean, that's the beauty of compliance, though, isn't it? Because if you can have the intention and the motivation to understand the reasons why you're doing it rather than the tick box, exercise, then it's going to make your whole compliance activities a lot more meaningful. And yeah.
100%.
Um,
100%.
is there like a silver bullet in all of this, do you think?
There's no silver bullet to anything anymore, Martin, but I do think that when we look at
Yeah, that's true.
compliance, with the complexities and how the landscape is shifting, I think that keeping it a priority. So, from my chair, it comes back to the leadership shadow. We would talk about this during our one place
Mm,
days to get together. But when you look at the leadership shadow, what the leader cares about, the rest of the organization is going to care about. So the silver bullet really starts with, is this a priority for your school and for your brand? And I would even go so far, Martin, to say for your culture. So what do I mean
mm,
by that? Where we have our mission statements on our website, when we tout what makes us special from other childcare organizations. I look at websites and I can see whether or not it's voiced as a priority. And there's some out there that do it exceptionally well, and some that say we have safety standards, but it's not up there with their curriculum. It's not up there. But I would argue
mm.
that when there's an issue, when does it become a priority? It becomes the only priority. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
families are getting, parents, when they're looking for education or childcare, they're going on your licensing website.
Mm,
They've become very savvy about that. Insurance companies are going on, we're just going
mm.
to talk around the focus of regulatory and licensing, but those are public documents, record that are being used to your advantage or to your disadvantage. So the silver bullet really is, it's a priority. It starts at the top. Let's make sure that we have a compliance practice in our school, and define that as you will.
Mm,
Right back at the beginning, I said, what's the lens through which we define that? So it's
mm.
leadership. I would say that it's training and education. I would put those two things hand in hand. The reason why I say that is it's the why are we doing this? It's not meant to be punitive. Like, why are we doing this? And then here's
Yeah.
how to do it. So those two things go hand in hand. For example, if I were to walk into your school, anybody that I meet, I should be able to say, tell me how compliance affects you and your job. What do you do to ensure compliance in your school? Now, you might use the word safety, you might use another word other than compliance, whatever the culture is, but I should be able to get an answer regardless of the person in the kitchen, the person in the classroom, the person at the front desk. They soundbite where they're important because it's the responsibility throughout the school as a culture for every single person for the safety of the children, the families, the staff, etc. So those are just some ideas: leadership, training, the education behind it, and don't leave anybody out. It's across the school.
Yeah, I think, we, sometimes observe that, on sometimes childcare websites, they talk a big game about the safety of the child, and as they should. But when you actually dig in a bit further, it's interesting to see that, whether their priorities actually, as they said, and and I think one of the things that we've found, especially, why we created One Place, was that if you can align the actual operations on the floor level, with the educators, to basically be in that mindset of of having a safety focused, compliance focused, then it basically helps execute your overall leadership goals of wanting this place to be a safe and nurturing place, because the last thing we ever want, no one wants, is to have an injury with a child,
Right.
a severe injured child, and stuff like that. So I think, and as you said, people kind of have in the past been quite reactive, but I get a sense that the tide is shifting,
Right.
that people realize the importance of this. And as you mentioned, licensing infringements, you can actually lose your insurance,
That's
or you
right.
can get fined, and all the time, resulted of just managing those sort of things actually cost you money. So it's those hidden costs that people tend to
That's
forget about,
exactly
isn't it?
right.
Yeah.
Can I just build on that for a second, Martin?
Sure.
Because the part about back to the staff for a second, we're just going to use that as a for example. Um, Many of them don't know what a licensing visit entails. And if you were to pull up your best licensing visit and maybe your competitor's worst licensing visit, help them understand what parts of this they have an ownership in. Because, like you said,
Yeah.
that's public record. And of course, you can have, there's commentary and such that can go along with that about, it was remedied, et cetera. But those are things that understanding at every level, at the classroom level, so that active supervision as a, for example, why is that so important? So I realize it's part of the onboarding, but it almost needs to be part of the everyday. The last
Yeah.
point I want to make is I recently was working with a school where they're OSHA. We tend to think of OSHA more in like manufacturing warehouses, but OSHA actually is part of handling chemicals and hazardous materials in the school setting.
Mm.
This particular school ended up with a fine of $6,500 for unlabeled bleach. And the
Yeah.
situation that happened was it was being prepared to be mixed. And in the process, it was left out in what looked like a water jug, and somebody actually drank it.
Oh,
So
no.
these are real deal things. And, we think it's not going to happen to us until it does. And then it becomes the priority. So I just wanted to kind of bring that one more second over here about
Yeah.
the importance of it, because there are those real situations. And I've got others that I can share. It's not about fear. It's about how do we prevent, like you said, that preventative, proactive attitude. So just wanted to highlight that a little bit further.
That's great. Okay. So, sort of finally, we ask our guests, looking forward, what do you think are the big challenges facing the sector in the next few years?
Um, I could go a lot of different ways. I'm gonna start with a positive, and then I'm gonna kind of end with a challenge that we have. The positive is I think artificial intelligence is something that's coming to early
Mm,
education. And when it comes to compliance, some of the organizations that I'm working with right now, there's one in particular that has an AI tool that allows you to say, what is the regulation in the 3-year-old room? I'm reconfiguring it. What does it need to be for square footage, et cetera? So AI can play a role for a quick answer. In the middle of a crisis, you're not going to be going to AI. But when you're looking at your policies or you need a quick answer, I think that's a
mm,
positive use of artificial intelligence, particularly around regulations and licensing. So that's the plus. On the side where I think we're going to have a challenge, you and I both know Samantha Phillips with
mm.
Comploy, and the challenge with getting liability insurance is real. And insurers are dropping coverage, they're dropping states, and they're looking. I wouldn't say they're looking for, I don't want to be disingenuous here, but if you have a citation, it could be a reason for somebody losing coverage. I just learned of a school who lost coverage because of a licensing. It was an active supervision, it was a supervision issue. They had just been renewed and then it was dropped.
Yeah.
So these are where these worlds intersect. One place, the compliance alliance, insurance, making sure that although it's a challenge, I think we can all play a part in controlling the narrative, making sure that your licensing inspections are as clean and squeaky as they possibly can be, or justifiable. But controlling the narrative is what we talk about in insurance, so that when you're up for renewal, it's so that you've got the great story to tell of how you are being proactive in all of your safety and also property management, for that matter, standards, and how you're documenting things to ensure you're staying on top of it. So it is a challenge. It's a definite challenge that we need a lot of
Mm.
voices around, and then to do our part as best we can to ensure insurance being renewed.
And I think it's interesting, like a lot of the problems that you're sort of experiencing in the US, we're having similar sort of challenges, in Australia and New Zealand as well. I mean, like you said, AI is a bit of an unknown, but there will be an impact, I think, in some way. Insurances in New Zealand and Australia is not such as big a deal. However, the shortage of educators,
Yes.
is another thing too, um, and trying to do more with less, as another thing. Okay, so just before we finish up, finally, we ask people what their personal motto or motivational quote. And I'm looking forward to this, Lynn, because I know that you've got a doozy for us. So what would you like to share with us for our listeners?
Oh, I knew that question was coming, and I said, which one do I want to pick? But
Well, exactly,
there are so many, but I would say, as it pertains to the body of work that I'm involved with compliance, I still go back to Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I actually look to see if it's still relevant, and it is. It is still relevant today. But one of the habits is begin with the end in mind.
Mm,
So if we know we want to elevate our compliance practices, let's begin with the end in mind. And you know me well, I'm a process gal. So what are we going to do in the first 60, 90 days that we're going to get us closer to that, and then rinse, repeat 30, 60, 90 days. So begin with the end in mind. But his other tenet that I absolutely love, I think we can do more of this as in society as a whole. Seek first to understand, then be understood. We have 2 ears and one mouth. Use them proportionately. We're often too busy waiting to say what's next or what we think,
yeah,
where this whole idea of people have a lot to say if you give them the chance to say it. So 2 ears, one mouth. Seek first to understand, then be understood. So it's those two married together.
yeah, love it. And I think, especially in this world of social media where we're kind of shouting at each other all the time, being able to listen and just pause and have a deep breath and just hopefully understand the person's perspective, even though you may not agree with it, is a good thing, I think. So, yeah.
Couldn't agree.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Lynn. I mean, it's always good to talk to you. I mean, Lynn's an old friend of mine, and it's great to have her on the podcast. So we wish you well, and thank you out there in internet land, and we will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me. And you'll be on one of our episodes very soon. It's already been recorded and that'll be published very soon. So thanks for all the good
Great.
work you do at One Place.